Business rock stars, let me introduce you to a game-changing sponsor, Plains Equipment Rentals. They're not just here to make waves. They're here to revolutionize the way the equipment rental business is done across Western Canada. Looking for the right equipment to tackle your next big project? Look no further than Plains. Featuring an extensive array of machinery, from front wheel loaders to excavators and a plethora of attachments, they offer all you require to accomplish your tasks with precision. And here's the cherry on top. They're an authorized dealer for Arctic snow and ice products. But Plains isn't just about renting equipment. They're about building relationships. They prioritize long-term partnerships, ensuring that you have a collaborative equipment partner every step of the way. So whether you're in construction, snow removal, excavation, or mining, Plains Equipment Rentals is here to support you. Visit www.plainsequipmentrentals.com or call 587-417-2488 to learn more and reserve your equipment today. Give Sean a call and let him know I sent you. Choose Plains Equipment Rentals and rock your next project. Thanks for listening to a word from our sponsor. Let's get back to the show. Welcome to episode 132 of the Business Development Podcast. And on today's expert guest interview, we are chatting with the CEO of Varme Energy Canada, Sean Collins. This is an episode you are not going to want to miss. Stick with us.
The great Mark Cuban once said, "Business happens over years and years. Value is measured in the total upside of a business relationship, not by how much you squeezed out in any one deal." And we couldn't agree more. This is the Business Development Podcast, based in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and broadcasting to the world. You'll get expert business development advice, tips and experiences, and you'll hear interviews with business owners, CEOs, and business development reps. You'll get actionable advice on how to grow business. Brought to you by Capital Business Development, capitalbd.ca. Let's do it. Welcome to the Business Development Podcast. And now your expert host, Kelly Kennedy.
Welcome to episode 132 of the Business Development Podcast. And today we bring an absolute rock star expert guest for you with over 15 years of hands-on experience in the energy transition and renewable energy project development. Sean Collins stands out as a seasoned leader in the global push towards sustainability. From securing pioneering geothermal resource rights in Alberta to speaking at the United Nations on multiple occasions, Sean's journey is marked by a relentless dedication to driving positive change in the energy sector. As the CEO of Varme Energy, he pioneers North America's first specialized waste-to-energy carbon capture and storage projects, envisioning a future where garbage is both landfill-free and carbon-free. In addition to his leadership roles at Varme Energy and Remora Ventures, Sean's entrepreneurial journey is marked by the founding of impactful initiatives such as Terrapin Geothermics, Student Energy, and the Next 30. Through these ventures, he has not only contributed to technological innovation, but has also nurtured the next generation of climate leaders. Sean's influence extends beyond the boardroom, as evidenced by his recognition in the top 40 under 40 in Edmonton and his award-winning radio show, Energy Voices. From his pioneering work in geothermal energy to his advocacy on the global stage at events like COP21 in Paris, Sean Collins is a force to be reckoned with in the fight against climate change, embodying the ethos of sustainable development and leaving an indelible mark on the world. With a track record of innovation, leadership, and unwavering commitment, Sean continues to inspire and drive forward the transition towards a greener, more sustainable future. Sean, it's an absolute honor to have you on the show today.
Real joy to be here. I definitely need to bring you along as a hype man. No, I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Great to be here. Yeah.
No, thank you. And before we get started, congratulations on the announcement for the Edmonton facility. That is absolutely amazing. I can't wait to talk with you about that. And I know that's been a long time in the making, I'm sure, and something that we need super badly here in the city. As an Edmonton resident who only gets my garbage picked up every second week, I look forward to more garbage being picked up. So Sean, you've been in this space for an incredibly long time. You're a climate-focused entrepreneur. Amazing, very commendable, especially here in Alberta. Take us back to the beginning. How did you end up on this journey? Who is Sean Collins?
Yeah, I would say just hook, line, and sinker for the energy transition space since a pretty young age. Just sort of found it to be incredibly compelling. I would say I've always thought these were the smart risks to take early career, was that this seemed like a long-term trend line of a new successful industry. So you kind of poked sort of where did it start? For me, I'm born and raised Alberta boy, born in Rocky Mountain House. My dad was in the RCMP, so we bounced around decent amount growing up, but sort of early childhood, mostly in Edmonton area in Sherwood Park, and then end of elementary, junior high, and high school, all in Fort McMurray. So my dad got posted up there in mid 1990s, boom time Fort McMurray as it was getting going.
Wow.
We moved up to Fort Mac, and so it's a pretty cool experience getting to watch the largest industrial project on earth get built in your hometown. Also, boom time Fort McMurray. My dad ran the drug section of the RCMP up there, and so just crazy stories. And
I bet.
The most heated the Canadian economy ever got was sort of mid 2000s on the Fort McMurray oil sands boom. And so I would say for me, dual grabs emotionally. One, that holy heck, we can build really large things. The sort of raw capacity we have, like Edmonton's got the largest construction company in the country, the largest, even things like the Syncrude tailings pond was the largest dam by volume in the world until the Yangtze Dam came online. Just this sort of magnitude and scale of the oil sands is like a sheer feat of engineering and construction. And then I would say kind of grabbed also by the environmental challenge of it's also the highest emitting, polluting industry in Canada. And kind of how do you square that circle that we can, I would say I was sort of compelled to this idea that we can pursue large scale decarbonization projects with the same sort of ambition and that we've pursued traditional energy projects, or sort of a large part of my thesis is just do both. Things like carbon capture is build a chemical plant plus the carbon capture plant. And now you're the net zero chemical plant. So I'd say just always grabbed by that sort of we need to reconcile with Mother Earth things like climate change and atmospheric CO2 concentrations, and that's a feat of engineering and policy and economics. And so I was sort of I went to business school at the U of A. I paid for university working for a road builder on Suncor base plant in Fort McMurray. So
wow.
I don't think there's I have maybe had one of the more blue collar-y ways of paying for business school and working a 24/4 shift for a road builder. Yeah. That same thing, just sort of the appreciation of like we're a pretty damn hardworking province in Alberta.
Yes. Yes.
And that at 18 years old, you can make an equivalent of $80,000 a year just working as a pressure washer for a road builder. Yeah. Sort of economic opportunity created by wages has been pretty like value creating to Albertans. And so, yeah. So for me, I would say the real passion for energy transition, like at a young age, was more the sort of environmental passion, but sort of in business school, ran into a few folks and we started this International Student Energy Summit event that we did in 2009 in Calgary. And then out of that, a couple years later, we co-founded a charity called Student Energy that was really focused around how do you accelerate the transition to a sustainable energy system, really focused at the university audience, sort of where you first gain real like agency and autonomy over your education and you're sort of deciding what you want to do with your career. That was sort of our sort of theory of change, was that if you could activate, educate, inspire, connect, resource, and give a seat at the table for young people in energy transition, that would help accelerate the energy transition. So early part of my career, I had my own consulting company for a little while and then really focused on student energy. So myself and Kaylee, two of the three co-founders, we sort of made that our full-time job for a few years. So we'd done this first summit in Calgary in 2009, then second Student Energy Summit in Vancouver in 2011. And then kind of tried to see if we could make a breakout out of Canada. And so incorporated as a charity, did our next event in Trondheim, Norway, where we sort of bid the thing out to the world. We had teams compete from around the world to sort of bid to host the next Student Energy Summit. And so the idea being that it's like a community, like a self-driven community of whoever wants to put in the effort to sort of, and always a little bit of that thread of like healthy competition is healthy. It brings out the best in people that you want to give the summit to the people that want to host it the most and sort of put the most effort in. And so really cool moments, sort of like 2013, 2014, 2015, like pretty focused on student energy. We built this big energy literacy platform. Some of our YouTube videos have done sort of 2, 3, 4 million views, just really on how do you simply educate people on energy, sort of what is hydropower? How does it work? What is good about it? What is bad about it? Like we some of our thesis was it was really hard for young people to get involved in energy because the only thing that existed was these like 65-page white papers where somebody'd be like, I'm curious about coal. And he'd be like, here is a book. And sort of for people in 2012, like a 19-year-old in 2012 is not going to go read a 90-page white paper about pipeline. You need to sort of meet people where they are in terms of content. And so, again, the educational charity, we interpreted our charitable objects as being like education, sort of focused on like accessible content, accessible educational materials. That was sort of our first push, built this like interactive energy systems map. And so it was cool being part of the creation of some of that stuff because it sort of forces you to go down being like, now I will watch 47 videos on all the types of energy generation in the world. And you sort of, it's funny and then you map out the whole energy system and you're like, well, this entire multi-trillion-dollar energy system winds up at like heat, power, transportation, products. That's sort of it. There's like this, the actual end uses of energy are like pretty discrete. And then the sort of recognition of like most of the way we get there right now is through combustion of something to generate that energy. We want that energy. Like, I think sometimes there's a sense of like, oh, we should just do without everything and sit on our hands and like not eat. And you're like, okay, well, we're gonna continue traveling. We're gonna like humans are gonna use energy. It's the atomic unit of the economy. We just need to deliver that energy in a way that reconciles with a net zero, like not atmospheric CO2 climbing reality. And so for me, that kind of wraps the student energy story. Maybe I'll pause there and then sort of post student energy got more involved in the sort of for-profit side of life, but maybe happy to pause there if you want to poke on any student energy stuff.
You know what? The thing that really wraps me is just the length of time that you have spent. You've literally spent your whole life in the energy sector in one way or another. You're the first guest we've had that's been their experience. And I think that's pretty impressive, actually. And kind of wild.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sean. I was just going to say, and kind of wild that this is the avenue that you kind of went on. Like, it's not that far off from the basic energy sector as it stands, right?
Yeah. Like, I would sometimes say I'm like very happy at decisions 22-year-old Sean made. I would say even like was towards the end of university, was working for a really cool like events and marketing company, started my own consulting company, was doing pretty well. And then went from making like 140 grand for myself to making 50 grand for student energy. And at the time I was just like extremely conscientious, being like, whatever, like you can always go do that again. If you now need to go rustle up clients and customers and do consulting again. But like, I'm fresh out of university, my rent at my buddy's house was $500 a month. It was just sort of a moment where you're like, this is worth really diving into and sacrificing like the sort of immediate short-term financial upside for the opportunity. Like the opportunity to work on student energy, I think was like the first summit in Calgary, we had students from like 25 countries come. And so you're just sort of part of an entity where it's sort of by default giving you exposure to some of the youngest, hungriest climate and energy folks in 100 countries around the world. And so just really happy that was sort of the risk to take, and the reward sort of out of that has been like a lifelong passion for the space. It just kind of keeps getting better.
Could you have ever seen your future today from that moment then?
Like, I would say like this for us was sort of the point of it. We thought that, I think for us, like pretty intentional that even like one of my co-founders, Kaylee, she's moved to Geneva. She's working in sustainable finance for the UN and has sort of helped craft how the global financial industry like integrates and finances sustainable energy projects. Like it's sort of the whole group. I think it was fun to be, a lot of us, I would say, were like caught and inspired by things like An Inconvenient Truth when it came out in 2007. Mm-hmm. I think that was sort of the first time you're like, well, like, obviously we're causing climate change. This is sort of, it's not. And then you're now seeing things like wildfire 20 years later, like emerge as pretty obvious, even more obvious sort of physical. But I would say for a lot of us, and again, a lot of us in business school too. So there's just a general like competitive hunger to be part of the new growth industry. And it's been, I would say, so interesting to see by how much demonstrated volume youth are voting with their feet by wanting to work for clean energy, renewable energy. Like jobs that are in that space get 500 applicants. Jobs that are in like traditional energy sometimes get none. Calgary U of C closed their petroleum engineering program 2 years ago. That's crazy. They had no applicants. No one wants to be a petroleum engineer in Calgary anymore. Just sort of these like moments where it's such a marked generational shift of interest into this space. It's like winning elections on climate policy is sort of set the federal context for 10 years now. And so just interesting. It's like to be part of that early days, I would say for a lot of us, like kind of knew it would come. Like we're going to hit a net zero energy system at some point in time, and more interested in sort of helping drive that faster than sort of waiting for people to tell you we should wait.
Yeah. And I'm just going to ask you a question regarding climate change. I would consider with the amount of time that you've spent researching climate change that I could probably call you an expert in that at this point. And one of the questions that I know I would get slammed on if I didn't ask you was, how are we able to tell what is different from baseline climate change that happens all the time versus human generated climate change? How are we able to differentiate how much different that is?
Yeah. The very direct and clear answer I would give is atmospheric CO2 concentration. And you look at the 1 million years preceding the Industrial Revolution, and we like never wavered much around 280 parts per million of CO2. So for the 1 million previous years to us combusting things, the CO2 concentration never got above 300. And now we're like well north of 420. In 200 years, we're nearly doubling the atmospheric CO2 concentration because we combust things that release CO2 to the atmosphere. Yeah. That's how we know it's our fault.
I see. Because I think that is the argument that everyone will say is like, well, the world climate always changes. How do we know that it's us? But you're right. Like what you're saying is there is a measurable way to see that it is us.
Yeah. And like, happy to screen share. I don't know if that's the vibe for this thing, but the parabolic curve. If you look at, this is where it's interesting. It's a parabolic curve the moment you figure out steam, like coal and biomass and steam in the UK and the Industrial Revolution starts. You see the global use of energy, parabolic curve, the global GDP, parabolic curve, human population, parabolic curve. And primarily due to the value, like we as a species have sort of thrived because of the energy we've been able to extract and how we put that into work. And now it runs everything in society is run off of energy, but it all runs off of emissions as well. And so I always sort of give people the thought exercise of like, think about the exhaust stacks of every single power plant operating on Earth right now, every single furnace operating on Earth right now, every single car operating on Earth right now. Stack all those next to one another. That's the amount of combustion happening in real time all day, every day since the 1700s. It's a marked and material impact on the atmosphere, and now has created things like greenhouse effect that it's sort of impossible to ignore the science on global warming.
Well, we had the worst fire season that I can even ever remember last spring. I don't remember in my lifetime a worse fire season in Alberta. I don't remember a stranger winter than the winter that we have just experienced, where basically we didn't get cold. We didn't get cold until January. And even then it was like, what, a week, 2 days, and then we were back up to like a warm. Alberta is experiencing changes in climate unlike anything that I have ever seen in my life.
Yeah. And it's, I would say, as someone who's dedicated their career since 2007 into this, it's kind of sucks it's taken this long to the point where I even find it still a bit crazy. You're like in Edmonton this year, you had like 100 days of high air quality. And you can literally physically see the carbon in your eyeballs and in your lungs and when you cough. We're still sort of like, is this worth responding to? And then, my wife, she's one of the longest serving employees for Canada Wildfire. And just like the wildfire scientists spend more time talking about climate change than the renewable energy folks do. All the fire seasons have shifted. They've started earlier. There's even through this winter, like in winter, they were talking about off-highway vehicle bans in Northern Alberta. You're like starting
in winter.
There's like 100 fires burning in Northern Alberta and Northern BC all through the winter, this winter.
Wow.
And so again, like these moments where, for me, try to orient, there's like one atmosphere that we all share. And there's 4 times, from my understanding, it was like 3 to 4 times the amount of emissions from trees combusting this year than from the traditional economy. And so stuff that kind of needs to start entering the realm a bit on, like, in terms of national emissions reduction strategy, if we can intelligently manage forestry biomass in a way that leaves it less likely to combust, we should do those things. And it has the same impact as, I find sometimes I would say, like, we're focused on these like millimeter exhaust stacks where it's like my Honda CRV. It's like, cool, 4% of the trees in Canada burned this year. So if we can make that not happen, sort of, just so much of the oxygen and dialogue is caught up in these like inconsequential consumer decisions, where the macro picture is not that great and needs a bit more attention, in my opinion.
Well, luckily, we have you putting some attention on it. So we appreciate your hard work, Sean. So take us past student energy. What happened next?
Yeah. So we gave pretty good few-year run at that and pretty good growth to the organization. You though quickly deviate from being close to being students. And so we were sort of pretty conscious that sort of for youth by youth was always the sort of design and structure of the organization. I started to precipitate a bit of that. Me and Renee, we had our first child. And so like I'm not that close to being a university student anymore when we're getting ready for first child. Janice, our third co-founder, was going to move to New York to go to Columbia, and Kaylee was moving to Geneva. And so we sort of managed a transition. We brought in Meredith Adler as a phenomenal executive director to sort of lead the chapter 2, and she's now transitioned to Helen, who's the sort of chapter 3 executive director. So we sort of turned over the student energy baton to the next wave of hooligans, and they ran and did a great job with it. And for me, I would say sort of itch into only downside of a scaled charity is there's no equity kicker. There's no sort of, did still have the business degree, and the sort of marketing and finance DNA was sort of grabbing me. And so for me, sort of coming out of that, I mentioned I'd done a radio show as part of Student Energy. I did sort of different interviews on geothermal and nuclear and solar and wind, and sort of tried to do topic deep dives on a bunch of different generation categories, and sort of that helped educate me a bit on different energy types. And I would say coming from Alberta was pretty stricken by the geothermal opportunity. It's the only renewable you drill for. It's the only baseload renewable energy heat source in the world. And so one where I thought there was just some sort of natural competitive advantages for Alberta. And so myself and a couple of business partners that I'd met, the sort of first interaction was with Tim Grover and then Ryan Maxwell. We started Terrapin Geothermics. So originally under the thesis, you learn these things as you go. Originally our thesis was that if you could modify power generation technology to operate at a lower temperature, that was the secret sauce to unlock it. We later sort of just got into it as conventional geothermal project development. Nobody really tried that yet. and a lot of the reasons that there wasn't a regulatory rights framework, it's only recently that the province has put that out. So in 2016, we started Terrapin, spent about the first year and a half working on sort of more of a engine development thesis, and then pivoted into conventional geothermal development. We were successful in securing a large federal grant and put together a partnership with the municipal district of Greenview to work on the Alberta #1 geothermal project. And so really, really fun, challenging experience. Still to this date, no real structural supports provincially for geothermal exist. We use the language of like tough sledding, but still making progress. And so really, really phenomenal experience. Took us about a 2-year process, 2.5-year process to get provisional geothermal resource rights. So this is one of the more fun contracts of life. We got issued a contract from the Queen of England for resource rights to the core of the earth.
Cool.
all contracts with the Crown were with the Queen of England, and the language in the first draft was to the core of the earth. And so just sort of those moments where you make progress, that was the sort of pilot resource rights framework that the province built the sort of now sort of accessible geothermal resource rights framework on top of. And so, yeah, the whole, that experience too of raising capital and putting together partnerships and still ongoing journey. We're just in May of last year issued the surface development permit and the drilling permit. And so the average geothermal project takes 7 to 9 years to generate first power. And so sort of midstream on the Terrapin story, I'm on the board. So as we set up the first project, the Alberta #1 project, we brought in Kathy Hickson as the CEO of the project. She's drilled a number of really great geothermal projects in Iceland and around the world. And so I'm on the board and largest shareholder for Terrapin, and then jumped into Remora as a more of an investor front and into Varme as we got going. So I would say sort of 2016 onwards, now sort of entirely in the for-profit project development world. I would say like very stricken by the opportunity in project development in energy.
Well, so like what you're saying essentially is before you did this, there was absolutely no framework at all for geothermal projects within Alberta. Or is that in Canada? It sounds like potentially?
No, just in Alberta. So it's it's all regulated provincially. So the Deep project in Saskatchewan had resource rights from the province of Saskatchewan. There's a project in BC. Alberta was the laggard in the space. And so there was no geothermal regulatory framework that existed. And so we wrote a number of white papers. We did a workshop at Alberta Energy with, I think, 23 ministries, sub-ministries, agencies, regulatory bodies, and sort of had to walk hand in hand with the province. And it wound up with an order in council and cabinet from Minister Savage for the first
interesting
activity rights, and structured as activity rights. So sort of what is heat as a resource? And the thing you're trying to prevent is someone else also executing on that activity. And so sort of using essentially the oil and gas rights framework, but structured as exclusive activity rights.
So the project will take place in the MD of Greenview, but how does a geothermal project work exactly? I know you have to drill very deep. How deep do you have to drill?
Yeah, you're sort of two pathways for drilling: closed loop systems and open loops, sort of open systems, or your dynamic production and injection. Ever and a few other folks have done some phenomenal work in the closed loop world. Mostly it takes away the drilling risk. You kind of know how hot the rocks are. The pro of the Ever system is you sort of know how much heat you have. You don't really have any drilling risk, but it's a bit like a heat exchanger in the earth, and so you're slowly cooling your reservoir down. Whereas if the Alberta #1 project is a dynamic production and injection, where you have production wells that are bringing up hot water and injection wells that are re-injecting now slightly colder water that you've extracted the thermal. And so generally project sort of sub 3,500 meter drill depth. So like 3.5 kilometers downhole, pretty wide diameter wells. Geothermal, sort of the whole name of the game is get as much water as you possibly can to the surface to extract as much heat as you possibly can, as power and as heat. And so they're similar. This is just sort of a bit of a cop out, but they're like similar to like SAGD wells, where they're big. Yeah. Sort of in like you kind of want big wells, but for us, those might go 300 meters. We're going 10 times deeper for a geothermal well. And so one where we're a hot sedimentary aquifer system in Alberta, and you need to get, if you want to produce power, you have to get sort of at least above 100 Celsius. You generally want to be at least above like 105 Celsius. And so in the MD, if you sort of go 3,500 meters below, you're getting into the 120 Celsius plus range.
Wow. Is that the only area that makes sense in Alberta to drill?
No, so like they did a pilot project. Their Everlight project was actually in Rocky Mountain House region. Lisa Mueller and her gang at Futerra, they're doing a project where they're essentially like co-firing geothermal with produced gas. So in some reservoirs, a lot of gas wells are 95% water. There's some gas that comes up and gets extracted off of it. And so some sort of novel engineering concepts where they're doing sort of a co-fired, you take that gas and you lift the temperature of the geothermal that maybe is coming up at. And so that one's like, you have some emissions in there, but that's still sort of a pretty innovative energy delivery mechanism. So as a rule of thumb, generally closer to the mountains, the better. The mountains sort of pull up your geology. You want to be as close to the core of the earth as possible. And so again, sort of even Grand Prairie area, Hinton, Rocky Mountain House, like Slave Lake, like Whitecourt area, there's lots of pockets, especially areas where if you only need it for industrial process heat, a lot of those processes are maybe like, even if you could, like a kiln, if you could heat that to 80, 90 degrees Celsius, you could get that at lower depths and temperatures.
Wow. So it's a solution for actually a lot of applications.
Yeah, it's not a magic bullet. Like some people are like, could it power everything? I'm like, it's expensive. You're now, it costs you money to go get your renewable resource. You have to drill. Like the hardest part about geothermal is definitely like an area of necessary supports is on the drilling supports. It's really challenging because as in oil and gas, you can drill dry wells, you can have bad temperatures, you can have drilling issues. Like drilling is not a no risk proposition. And so I would say from an investment perspective, tends to get out competed from a risk perspective by wind and solar, waste to energy, other things where just like, I'm on land. I know that land is there. I know the sun is this bright. I know the wind is this strong. I know garbage has this much energy in it.
Yeah.
There's just more sort of certainty that you know what you're going to get in terms of your energy resource. Whereas in geothermal, you might have to drill, like if you're drilling a whole field of wells to make sure that stacks to deliver the energy required. It's a lot of capital upfront, and there's not really any risk share supports that exist for that.
Interesting. What do you think the future will be for it?
Yeah, I go back to it's the only renewable baseload heat source on Earth. I think for heating applications, it should be thought of as a primary solution. I think for power solutions, it's not as compelling unless you're in volcanic systems. But anywhere there's heating, like again, the ambient air temperature in our office is 21 degrees Celsius. You don't have to go very shallow to get 21 degrees Celsius. In homes, geo-exchange systems, geoloop systems, district heating systems fed by geothermal resources. Again, like even pools and rec centers, the water's like 36 degrees Celsius, 37 degrees Celsius. For heating, it should be thought of as a primary solution, in my opinion. And one of the most obvious ones where it's just sort of tapping into residual available heat below our feet and is drilling jobs. And so that's one where I think I would also say like a bit of surprise at the lack of investment from like the drilling industry in geothermal. They've generally been reticent to sort of put some of their own money in. To me, it's sort of financing the future of the drilling economy. It really benefits the sort of core industry that we're in. And there's just an obviousness in the heat source, especially industrial process heating. If you're now subject to carbon pricing for anything you combust, there's no combustion and bringing up geofluid from subsurface and extracting the heat and then re-injecting. So can be thought of as sort of a baseload industrial process heat source.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Have you had much government investment in any of your projects so far?
So the Alberta number one geothermal project secured a $25.5 million grant from the federal government through their Emerging Renewables Power Program. So pretty market support from the federal government. To date, there's been no provincial support into the project.
Interesting. Do you want to take us now then into Remora Ventures?
Yeah. So yeah, would go back to the now being in the more the for-profit phase of the career. I'd say also really stricken by the project development business model for bleeding the blood to get the resource rights and the land agreement and the municipal partnership and the grant efforts and all that. You now have a valuable project that is worth something that people will invest into. And I'd say recognition that there is almost one of the issues in energy transition is that there is so much of the project money available, the sort of large corporates, pension funds, sort of, if you can present a low risk investment opportunity, there's almost too much money in the world for that. The challenge is if you look at the sort of whole value chain of where like venture capital and private equity investment goes in the clean tech value chain, the least invested cog of that world is project development. It's sort of about 40% of the money goes into new technology. Sort of, you're going to invent the new battery, you're going to invent the new engine. We spent money there at Terrapin sort of chasing engine development. It was easier to raise that money when you're like, I'm going to build this new engine that's going to change the world. It's sort of easier to raise that type of money. And so again, about 40% into technology, lot into operations and construction, and only about 4% of the capital is allocated to project development. And so I would say, so the sort of Remora Ventures thesis for me was that this is the primary area of value creation in terms of new infrastructure delivery is in starting and launching new project development companies in the space. And so we sort of became a traditional project developer at Terrapin over the years, and then found success in that model. And you could raise capital, and it just sort of, it's an ecosystem that's healthy. And so with Remora, it's right now structured as a venture studio focused on starting project development companies that can originate investable projects in the energy and climate space. So sort of first kick at the can, helped start a company called Pressure Corp that's based out of Houston that's doing waste pressure to power project development. So sort of quick pitch there that sort of at all the high pressure gas distribution systems, they all step down from call it 700 PSI to 100 or 0 PSI and generally just blow off all of that pressure. And that can run a turbo expander to produce power. So anyways, the thesis for me that sort of now specialized project development companies that are, again, very specialized in the asset class that they're trying to develop creates value. And so Pressure Corp was an example of that. I'm on the board and an investor in a company called Terrapin. It's the largest carbon offset developers in Mexico, doing about 1 million tons a year plus of nature-based solutions, carbon removals as the project developers. And then kind of under that thesis, and so I hold my equity in Varme under Remora Ventures.
Okay.
And so the same thesis so kind of married perfectly in timing. About 3 years ago, got a call from a good friend from the Student Energy Days, Andreas Carlson. He was the chair of our 2013 Student Energy Summit we did in Trondheim, Norway. And then now fast forward to 2021, and he's working at a Norwegian private equity group, Green Transition Holding, that is doing waste to energy with carbon capture project development and looking for new growth opportunities. And so as he sort of explained to me the carbon capture model in Norway, I was like, we have a way better carbon capture ecosystem than exists over there. I was like, if you can make this work in Europe, I was like, it would definitely work here. And so I would say like I'm pretty hook, line, and sinker on like the waste energy with carbon capture business model as being particularly compelling. And so jumped in sort of 2 feet about 2 years ago to run Varme, and we've been sort of off to the races ever since.
So with Varme, can we introduce the world to what they are? Obviously, if you live in Alberta, you've seen Varme everywhere. If you've been to any oil and gas summits or anything like that, Sean has been speaking. You've been out and about. I'm actually impressed. I thought you guys were much older than you are. I was surprised when I kind of realized you've only been doing Varme specifically for a couple of years. I do want to make sure I have that correct. Is that correct? Yeah, we're a 2-year-old company. Wow. It is actually almost unbelievable how much you've done in 2 years. Yeah, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. That's good feedback. And we brought a pretty specialized team together, I would say, for this one. We've got the 1998 Chicago Bulls working on this thing, it feels like. Yeah. We get to tap into a lot of pretty sophisticated Norwegian expertise. There's 1,000 operating waste energy facilities in Europe. And so within our parent company, there's experience in refractory inside the furnace of a waste energy facility. They do some of that work in the largest facilities in Norway. And so just the like guts and sort of nuts and bolts of how these facilities operate, where they have issues, sort of just there's like a living, breathing experience that exists in sort of the asset class and category. And then our sort of team in Canada, pretty specialized. So our CFO, Mikhail Blum, he was sort of 20 years in London doing project finance, investment banking, financial advisory in London with some of the largest sort of investors in the world, specifically in waste to energy, anaerobic digestion, sort of, there's like a pretty sophisticated project finance community that exists over there. And then we get to import that. He lives in Toronto, and so we get to import that level of sophistication and expertise in the sort of structuring of the projects. And Wayne Carey, he was the senior manager for Pembina's Redwater fractionation and storage facility in Redwater for the last 7+ years. And so he's managed a couple $2 billion in construction execution in the industrial heartland, has operated the largest, most profitable asset for one of, I think, $25 billion plus oil and gas company. He was the chair of the Northeast Capital Industrial Association, has a regulatory capacity. And so just the sort of the experience in bringing large industrial facilities to life in Alberta,
I would say I'm the one that's sort of most pokey on the regulatory front, and we not quite the same as geothermal, where you're starting from scratch. But in this, there's like in lots of places there's not solid fuel regulations in terms of some of the regulatory streams. Our project sort of is multifaceted, and so that's good. It's really fun. Rory's our VP development, and Samir's our waste manager, and sort of everyone's got pretty specialized experience, and so been really fun experience so far.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we have a lot of people in the audience right now wondering, what is waste to energy? And I was hoping you would maybe give us a bit of a 101 on, why essentially it's so important.
Yeah, the very simple 101 is the waste and the garbage trucks, instead of going to the landfill and dumping their garbage into a landfill and covering it, instead that garbage comes to us. We put it in a specialized furnace, so high temperature furnace, and it's combusted. And then from there, it's essentially a traditional power plant. We have a steam boiler, turbine generator producing power. The energy value of waste is about 80%-ish of the energy value of coal, depending on seasonality and whatnot. And so kind of like weak coal in terms of energy value, but produces a reasonable amount of energy. And then our feature is now at the exhaust stack. As part of the flue gas cleanup process, we also layer in another gas cleanup process of carbon capture. And so that's where we're sort of most novel in the space. There's 4 large-scale operating waste energy facilities in Canada right now, but 1,000 plus in Europe. We're trying to be pioneers in the waste energy with carbon capture space. And so now you can be a landfill-free, carbon-free solution. And then the CO2 is captured, put into a pipeline, and put into a sequestration well. And so we use the language a little bit of it closes the carbon circle, where now that the plastic that was created from the natural gas underground that we used and bought it in a Happy Meal and then throw away, we combust it and capture that CO2 and put it back underground. And so expensive power generation if you're just looking at it as a pure power generation, but the sort of model for us is instead of the city paying the dump to tip their waste there, they instead pay us. We sell the clean electricity to the grid. And then now the sort of financial model for the assets, you generate carbon credits with the carbon. We're a physical ton of actual CO2 gas that you capture and sequester. So these are pretty high quality credits. And so right now the market, as people are worried about sort of is an avoided emission a real carbon credit, our stuff's pretty genuine. It's actual physical ton of CO2 gas. And so we've been able to get pretty good prices for the carbon credits on offtake agreements.
Could you also give us a bit of a 101 on what is carbon capture?
Yeah. So I would say overwhelmingly most of the active carbon capture in the world is amine capture plants. Shell's Quest project in Edmonton, it's been doing 1 million tons a year since 2015. Most are where you have like an amine solvent that binds to the CO2 in the exhaust gas. And so you can sort of think about it that there's a structure built within the exhaust that you spray your amine solvent and it captures the CO2. And now you have fluid that is both your amine solvent and your CO2. And then you have to boil off amine to now be left with pure CO2. And that gets compressed into a pipeline. And then your amine you regenerate and use for the next go round and that process. So you do have some degradation. The amine also captures if there is any sort of like an additional safety net. And so it does have a slight degradation over time. But now all the chemical companies are pitching their own proprietary amine solvents and you're getting the business cards all around. But that's generally the process for carbon capture.
Okay.
So amine captures the CO2, you boil off the amine, you're left with pure CO2, you put that into a pipeline and into a sequestration well.
Man, why have we not been doing this for like forever? Like to me, putting garbage in a landfill seems so like I don't want to call it barbaric, but barbaric. like if this has been around, like this doesn't sound like necessarily a new idea. Why has it taken so long to catch on?
So we may be the first greenfield waste energy with CCS facility day one in the world. So the CCS stuff is newer, like it just is. And it's such large scale processes that are so expensive. And even like Shell had to do with carbon capture what I had to do in geothermal. They had to create the protocol in 2015 for Shell to be able to generate a carbon capture credit. They had this like fancy math it was like for projects commissioned by this date, there's special rules. So there's like these fancy Shell rules in the protocol. And so that project, now Shell globally sells the CanSolve solvent. That's their proprietary solvent that was developed for the Quest project in Edmonton. And so really like Boundary Dam in Saskatchewan, Quest, Northwest Refinery, Nutrien, these are some of the world's like most advanced carbon capture projects. And now that, and I would say always people with this like, well, the CO2 is going to leak and it's all going to come back. There's always these sort of like darts that have been thrown at carbon capture, and people are like, this is an excuse to continue combusting. I'm like, yeah, because you captured the carbon. Like, what more do you want? Like, we want the stuff, we want the energy. And so I think there's been like narrative that you have to overcome, and so and then I would say the explosive gasoline on top that now in 2022 budget federally you added a 50% tax credit just before COP. The provincial government added a 12% Alberta carbon capture incentive program. And so these are still expensive plants. Carbon capture facility is not cheap. And then you're paying money for your amine, you're paying money for your compression, you're paying money for your transportation, you're paying money for your sequestration. Like, it's not cheap. And I would say also there's these sort of giant question marks on, is somebody going to rip away carbon pricing? And is the whole totem pole, like, there is no economic case to do carbon capture, transportation, and sequestration if you're not generating an economic credit for that. Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of it's been like wrapped up in like compelling, like the thermodynamics and physics of it is like solved. It's more the policy regime, the investment certainty. You're now asking Pathways Alliance to spend $10 billion on a carbon capture pipeline on all these capture plants to then maybe rip away carbon pricing.
Yeah.
It's horrible to overcome.
Yeah. I know like some of the questions that I've heard come up are like, Canada, we're doing so much, right? Like we're doing a ton. I don't know whether we're necessarily leading it, but we are doing an absolute ton to do with what, carbon capture, trying to be environmentally friendly, things like this. But, I've also heard the argument that Canada is pretty small in the grand scope of the world. And if we're kind of doing all this stuff a bit like martyrs, if the rest of the world isn't on board, does it even matter?
Yeah. I'd go to like the amount of like, it's all of our atmospheres. And I just find it so non-compelling, that message of like, whatever, should we even try? You're like, great, inspiring leadership. Canada, we are also the second largest forest in the world. And so it does matter what China and India and the rest of the world does in terms of their emissions. That impacts our lungs and our forests. And so, I don't know. It's just one of those, like, I think we invent lots of reasons to not do stuff and just like not have to act and change. And this is one that always felt like it's coming whether we want it to or not. Like the impact on climate is coming, the impact on the economy, the impact on oil consumption, like it's coming whether you want it to or not. And rather than spend all of our time debating of like, does what we do matter? Maybe we should just try to make as much money as we possibly can while all of the capital in the world is being invested in this space. Just find there's so much like reasons to be laggards and not try. And I find that very frustrating. How do we
get the rest of the world on board? Because you're right. Like, what a piss off if Canada, if our environment gets destroyed, if our place burns down or we're polluted, we can't even breathe outside. But it's not like, you're right. Like, it's a shared atmosphere. How does that move forward? Like, how do we get the world on board with this?
Yeah. Some of it's like, I don't know. China's leading everyone. They're already way past all of us in terms of actual execution on renewable energy spend. Like, I would say it feels more and more like it's not even as much of a challenge of how do you get the world on board as like there's a competitive race underway and be part of winning that race. The amount of it's happening, like coal phase outs are happening at a more accelerated pace than anyone thought. The amount of displaced oil demand from the growth in EVs is faster than people have thought. And so I don't think that's a problem anymore. I think it's like you go see what those governments are saying and doing, and they're massively investing into some of these industries. I think some of the ways, like this is where I think Canada has huge leadership opportunities in, man, shouldn't we be building 20 giant new mines to produce totally sustainable, ethical, critical minerals for the future economy? Even some interesting stuff like apparently Fort McMurray bitumen makes phenomenal carbon fiber. You're like, you can knock out 40% of the weight volume of all vehicles on Earth if you could figure out cheap carbon fiber. Like we have the best bitumen feedstock. Just some of those, like, just feels like we're so caught up in like, should we try, that we're getting lapped on the like future economy that's being built as it in real time.
Yeah. But you're right. It's like there are people working behind the scenes figuring this stuff out. And it's kind of one of those things where once we know about it, it's impossible to unknow it, right? So hopefully it does move forward in the right directions. You know, we've talked a lot about the wild successes you've had at Varme. I'm really impressed. I think most Albertans are very impressed with the work you guys are doing. One of the things that I wanted to know is, could you talk about some of the challenges that you've faced along the way and kind of getting this rolling?
Yeah. This one, the complexity of the Varme facility from a regulatory and a monetization perspective, you're sort of jealous of, like, I'm a big fan of Dan Balabin and the Green Gate Boys, but sort of wind and solar is a little bit more linear of, I have this much land, there's this much sun, it costs me this much for the panels, you make this much money, or you ride the market. Like it's a little bit more linear inputs, outputs. This one, so to stack all the different pieces where you need a long-term waste feedstock agreement, you need a power agreement, you need a physical CO2 pipeline for the actual carbon to go somewhere. For us, a lot of work around the carbon offset protocol system. By default, you don't stack multiple protocols, but we avoid methane at the landfill, and we capture carbon and sequester, and we displace grid electricity. So you need approvals for all those pieces. And then again, you're now in a new designated industrial zone in the heartland that doesn't have some of the contemplation for facilities like our type. And so each of those is just sort of a significant effort to crystallize. And so, each of those is and still, like, for us, we're not fully through the regulatory approvals process. We're not sort of shovels in the ground on construction just yet. We've got probably about another year ahead of us for some of these processes. And so maybe ask me again in a year. We've solved to the point we've solved today, and then lots more to go. This isn't sort of a fully baked, finalized deal yet.
Absolutely. Well, I do want to congratulate you on signing your agreement with Edmonton earlier. I guess it would have been last month at this point. That's a huge step in the right direction. $300 million project happening, I think, just outside of the city, 40 kilometers or something like that. Yeah. That's pretty wild. I'm pretty excited to see it.
Yeah, it's awesome. You said that at the start, sort of, you're excited to put your garbage. Are you excited about garbage pickup?
My God. Okay. So I just moved to Edmonton. I grew up in Spruce Grove where they do weekly garbage pickup. We have a fairly big family. And in Edmonton right now, they only do bi-weekly garbage pickup, which I get it. It's fine. But my gosh, if you have like a 6-person family, it is not an easy setup. So I hope we're able to get this online and start burning this garbage so that I can get hopefully weekly pickup again.
Yeah. You can make that pitch to the city. We're happy to be partners with the city of this.
I will, especially when this is up and running. I'll be like, you have no excuses now. Pick up my garbage once a week.
Yeah, it is exciting though. It feels like there's a reason to be excited about your waste. And there's also, I would say, like a sense of grief for some people of like, oh, I can't believe I'm throwing this away. And like, if you think like volume wise, Edmonton sends about 99 Eiffel Towers a year in weight to landfill a year. We all like produce a significant amount of volume. And so it's fun to think about it being excited is like, now you close that carbon circle. It's like, we get all the energy out of it. We sometimes use the language of, we use the whole buffalo of the waste. You get all the energy out, we capture the carbon, sequester it. You can get the metals out. Depending on the ash quality, you can use the ash for some soil amendments or other purposes. And so it's sort of the tip of the spear of the circular economy and changes the narrative a bit. if you're now getting all of the energy out of the plastic bag or the paper bag and its carbon is being sequestered, often that stuff now counts as a carbon dioxide removal. And so all of the like organic biogenic stuff that takes CO2 molecule out of the atmosphere into the banana peel or the hamburger bun. And now we sequester that underground. And so it does technically remove carbon from the atmosphere from all the biogenic stuff. So it's just like, it's still for us about, we didn't get into 2027 is the in-service date for the facility. But my wife says that all the time. Can't wait till our garbage gets burned at this thing.
Yeah, I'm on board, man. I can't wait either. The other thing that I wanted to talk to you about too was just that. You were talking about just the sheer mass of garbage. And when I was doing the research for the show, I came across that statistic on your site where you guys were talking about there's going to be, 70% more garbage than there is today by 2050. That is ridiculous.
Yeah. There's one where I would say it's weird. Some people sort of like, oh, like, is waste to energy giving up? Shouldn't we like reduce, reuse, recycle, reprocess? And we're like, all true. We work hand in hand with all those processes. It's sort of the raw math of waste volume generation says a different story. And so generally most projections are like at least a 50%, if not 70 to 100% increase in per person waste volumes by 2050. Wow. If you take, so right now, Canada, like Government of Canada stats, we landfilled about 26 million tons of garbage in Canada last year, almost 1 ton of waste per person per year. So like 2,200 pounds of garbage per person per year generated. That volume goes to landfill every year. And so we run the numbers of, if we just flatline, like say none of the growth happens, we just flatline what we landfill today, in the next 20 years, Canada will landfill 1.2 trillion pounds of garbage. And that to be like bananas. When Rory and I were in the office, I'm like, is that a trillion? I was like, what? And so it's pretty staggering, the amount of waste.
It is.
And Alberta is the highest per capita in Canada, and Canada's amongst the highest per capita in the world. And so interesting moment for reflection as well, that again, we think it's part of our normal, this is how our society operates, and we can choose to do environmentally progressive things with. But we said the thing with landfill that really sort of grabs me is we pay for that as a society. We buy that 1.2 trillion tons of disposal. It's not like that's sort of just something that we do. It's like it's paid usually to private landfills or sort of regional landfills. We like compensate others for putting it into the earth. You can compensate facilities like ours and just try to create new markets for this. So we're really passionate about the opportunity to create a landfill-free future in Canada.
Yeah, your timing is absolutely perfect. And yeah, I hope that you build an absolute ton of these things. Sean, it's been amazing. That takes us to the end of our show today. But before I go, you're talking to an absolute ton of entrepreneurs, and you are an incredibly accomplished and inspiring person. And I would just hope that you would give them just a little bit of advice. What's the best piece of advice that you could give to all these aspiring entrepreneurs? You know, maybe they're climate entrepreneurs looking to jump in, but they're a little afraid. What would you say to, 22-year-old Sean?
I'd say ambition is free. Your ambition and the scale and scope with which you go after it sometimes sets the likelihood of success of what you're pursuing. And it's sometimes easier to execute on larger things because they're more material. And it's one of the few things where it doesn't cost you anything to sort of set your sights on aggressive targets. So ambition is free would be my sort of tone. And we took some pretty ambitious positions with Student Energy and Terrapin and now with Varme, and generally have found that inspires confidence in people, that you have aggressive goals and targets. It makes it more material for them to get involved and support you.
Amazing. Ambition is free. I love it. This has been episode 132 of the Business Development Podcast. We have been graced by Sean Collins, CEO of Varme Energy Canada. It was an absolute honor to have you on, Sean. Yeah. Until next time, this has been the Business Development Podcast, and we will catch you on the flip side.
This has been the Business Development Podcast with Kelly Kennedy. Kelly has 15 years in sales and business development experience within the Alberta oil and gas industry and founded his own business development firm in 2020. His passion and his specialization is in customer relationship generation and business development. The show is brought to you by Capital Business Development, your business development specialists. For more, we invite you to the website at www.capitalbd.ca. See you next time. on the Business Development Podcast.
Hey, rock stars, you've heard the show, implemented some of the lessons, and still you want more. How about a one-on-one 3-month personalized coaching program with me, Kelly Kennedy? We'll work together to establish an effective business development program, overcome obstacles, and accomplish your growth goals in 2024. To book your free discovery call today, shoot me an email at podcast@capitalbd.ca or book coaching directly from my LinkedIn profile. Book your discovery call now and take that next step in your journey towards success. Your future starts today.